Causes and Consequences of the World War One, made by Alejandro López and José Clemente. Well, this is our index. This is our introduction. In this we are going to talk about World War One. This began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and lasted until 1918. During the conflict, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and the United States, the Allied Powers. Introduction about the causes of the World War One. There were many causes why critics say this war was inevitable, but the most important was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Bosnia. On 28 June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was shot dead with his wife by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Imperialist rivalry. Imperialism was the basis of the foreign policy of the most important European countries, believing that the higher nations should dominate the lower, which will provoke international rivalries and a fragile and unstable scenario. In addition to this was the arms race, known as Peace of Arms. When the 20th century started, the British Empire had expanded over the 5 continents, while France rules over large areas of Africa. As capitalism is based in expansion and increasing sales, industrialized countries need to constantly expand their markets. They also need raw materials and low prices, and these two were the main task of the colonies. However, a newly strong and industrialized Germany got late for their share and only obtained small areas of Africa. This fact increased rivalry between Germany and Britain or France, both of which have already some disagreements between them. Economic rivalry. Until the end of the 19th century, English industrial supremacy was indisputable. However, from then, Germany appears to be a powerful competitor that entered French, Belgian, and Russian markets. Between the United Kingdom and Germany, which were in Europe the two states with the greatest industrial and commercial development, so there was tension to achieve new markets, economic battle. Thus, Germany sees it necessary to find new markets where to sell its products, and the UK sees its colonial empire threatened. English mistrust made them seek the alliance with France by abandoning their traditional isolation. Nationalism. Militarism reflected in the armament race was linked with patriotic nationalistic propaganda in most European countries. State governments insisted in the peril of the war and in patriotic stance, creating a public opinion of proud patriotism in which each would think their country was the best and the others should know that their reasons were fair and others were not. That is, creating little resistance to a possible war among people. Militarism. By 1914, all the great powers except Britain had large standing armies. In addition, military experts stressed the importance of being able to quickly mobilize, organize, and move troops in case of a war. Generals in each country developed highly detailed plans for such a mobilization. Balkans problems. The Balkans referred to a cluster of nations in Eastern Europe. It lay between the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires. It is considered as one of the causes of the First World War, as it was strategically placed and it would help European nations achieve invincibility. The third, this region was also politically unstable, as there were different ethnicities and there was also rising nationalism in the region. Nationalism brought about tensions, and the fourth, there was also rising Serbian nationalist group. And 5. This Serbian nationalist group, in particular the Black Hand, brought about the assassination of Archduke. Conclusion of the causes of the World War I. In fact, there were many factors that intervened in this war. For this reason, critics said that this war was inevitable. Franz Ferdinand's death was the principal cause, but the others were so important too. A month after the death started, this war also called Great War. Now is the turn of my partner, José Clemente Mulero. Thanks.
Introduction about the consequences of World War I. World War I caused more damage than any other war before it. 9 million soldiers and as many civilians died in the war. Germany and Russia suffered most. Both countries lost almost 2 million men in battle. Large sections of land, especially in France and Belgium, were completely destroyed. Fighting light buildings, bridges, and railroad lines in ruins. Chemicals and gun shells made farming land unusable for years to come. World War I. Economic consequences. World War I cost the participating countries a lot of money. Germany and Great Britain spent about 60% of the money their economy produced. Countries had to raise taxes and borrow money from their citizens. They also printed money in order to buy weapons and other things they needed for war. This led to inflation after the war. The Allies wanted reparations from the Central Powers because they were responsible for starting the war. Economy all across Europe broke down. Companies had to close because men left their jobs to fight in the army. When they came back, there were no jobs left for them. Other businesses specialized in producing weapons. After the war, they had nothing else to sell. During the war, governments controlled the economy more than before. The United States entered the war very late. It did not suffer destruction the way European countries did, because they had played a smaller part in the war. America remained economically stronger than the others. World War I. Political consequences. World War I brought an end to 4 monarchies. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, Emperor Charles of Austria, and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had to step down. New countries were created out of all empires. Austria-Hungary was carved up into a number of independent states. Russia and Germany gave land to Poland. Countries in the Middle East were put under the control of Great Britain and France. What was left of the Ottoman Empire became Turkey. In the course of the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union emerged, together with a new ideology, communism. World War I. Social consequences. World War I changed society completely. Birth rates went down because millions of young men died. Civilians lost their homes and fled to other countries. The role of women also changed. They played a major part in replacing men in factories and offices. Many countries gave women more rights after the war had ended, including the right to vote. The upper classes lost their leading role in society. Young middle and lower class men and women demanded a say in forming their country after the war. Consequences of World War I. The first communist state, the Soviet Union. In 1917, the Bolshevik Party seized power during the Russian Revolution and created the Soviet Union, the world's first self-declared socialist state. The Bolsheviks thoroughly embraced the concept of proletarian internationalism and world revolution, seeing their struggle as an international rather than a purely regional cause. This was to have a phenomenal impact on the spread of communism during the 20th century, as the Soviet Union installed new Marxist-Leninist governments in Central and Eastern Europe, following World War II, and indirectly backed the ascension of others in the Americas, Asia, and Africa. Consequences of World War I. Balance of power. The balance of power in 1914 Europe was a major issue when World War I was declared in August 1914. The major protagonists believed that they held the balance of power when war was declared, and the statistics seemed to bear this out of if each nation studied its own strengths. Unfortunately, the combination of old tactics and new weapons led to the horrors of trench warfare and all that it associated with it. something the powers had failed to add into their calculation with regards to the balance of power in Europe. Consequences of World War I. Social trauma. In the wake of World War I, some veterans returned wounded, but not with obvious physical injuries. Instead, their symptoms were similar to those that had previously been associated with hysterical women, most commonly amnesia, or some kind of paralysis or inability to communicate with no clear physical cause. Conclusion: the consequences of World War I. In fact, there were many consequences, but for me the most important is the great impact it has in the economy of many countries. The cost of World War I were enormous. Undoubtedly, the most tragic and devastating of the losses caused by the war was the loss of life. Millions of soldiers died in battle, and countless civilians were killed by the side effects of the war: starvation, disease, or, in the case of the Armenians in Turkey, genocide. That's our geography.